So let me tell you about Hannelie very quickly. She's an executive head of Advent Tech Group, bringing over 12 years of teaching and lecturing in English literature and language. For the last 6 years, her career has evolved to focus on curriculum studies and leadership development, where she has made significant contributions. Hannelie is driven by her passion for professional development, using her leadership position to empower and uplift those she works with ensuring they reach their full potential.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Benny and the team for inviting me to contribute, and also a word of thanks to all the wonderful speakers. I'm privileged to be in a room with so many powerful leaders, as many of you have already expressed. I'm Hannelie Raubenheimer. I'm currently the executive head of Gaborone International School in Botswana, and I'm employed by Advitech, a JSE listed company who provides and drives education within South Africa, in Kenya, and as well as in Botswana. So I'm very privileged to share with you today some tips and tricks. I'm trying to be very practical about it, on how to develop leadership within your individual schools. Since this is a conference really aimed at women in particular, I looked at inspiration from Mother Nature. So today we'll learn a couple of lessons from butterflies, from trees, and also how plants grow. I'm mindful of time, so I'm not going to double click on some of the aspects. I'm more than willing to share my presentation, and you're welcome to access that there. Sometimes one seemingly inconsequential occurrence can have tremendous consequences. This isn't just a theory, it's a fact, scientifically substantiated by meteorologist Edward Lorenz in 1962 in order to retest weather predictions. Lorenz would enter the initial weather data into the computer and then check the results. And at first, Lorenz assumed that leaving out one small decimal point from the initial number wouldn't make a difference when calculating the weather. After all, Lorenz speculated that fraction of a decimal probably just represented some small and meaningless change in the air currents, like the fluttering of a butterfly's wings. What possible influence could that have on the weather? However, it turned out that if the data he put into the computer was even slightly different from the original, it produced an entirely different weather prediction. His unexpected calculations showed that those tiny movements he thought were insignificant actually had an incredible impact. In other words, a little flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil had the power to create a tornado in Texas. And thus the phenomenon known as the butterfly effect was born. The truth is, we are all butterflies. The effect our wings have, though, that is up to us. So there are those who believe themselves to be big picture people, and oftentimes their description of future results are grand and exciting. But for every big picture ever created, we had to consider all the little things that had to be factored in, delegated, completed, in order for this big picture to actually take shape. So it's a little bit like building a puzzle. So before we actually appreciate the bigger picture, we first have to carefully analyze, evaluate, and select the individual puzzle pieces. And then you have to arrange it in a certain way for this bigger picture to actually take shape. So my question this morning is, one of many I have, but my question is, what is the bigger picture for leadership when we look at leadership? One of the most valuable life lessons that I've learned in my life is that our lives are a lot less about ourselves than what we think. It's not about me standing here this morning, it's not about you. Our lives are a lot less about ourselves than what we think. And when I looked at the definition for leadership in particular, this is the one that resonated best with me. Leadership is about making others better as a result of our presence and making it able for them to sustain and continue to make the difference long after they have left their position, and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. Presence and absence. So there's been a shift in leadership over the last couple of years from that of being power and authority to having impact and influencing people. And this brought me then to this beautiful definition of leadership. I want to start with the last part, making sure that impact lasts in your absence. If we are to hold on to power and authority, we are not empowering people. The first part, we have to make others better as a result of our presence. We have to empower people. How do we do that? By sharing everything we know, our knowledge as well as our skills. So if this is the puzzle or the bigger picture, what are the individual puzzle pieces that we are building in creating this bigger picture? And I found something interesting to answer this question. It's called exponential leadership. It means that a true leader develops leaders. I'll be as bold as saying, stop calling yourself a leader until you are able to list the names of people who are developing leaders because of you. That is exponential leadership. So you see, it's great to have this puzzle, it's great to have this vision, but we have to remember every big picture ever created was done so by tiny actions, completed in perfection, one at a time. One of the greatest works of art hangs in the Louvre. And when Leonardo da Vinci created the Mona Lisa, he used the tiniest brush he's ever used before. And with the pressure so delicate and the movement so slight, even using a magnifying glass today, it's impossible to distinguish between the individual brush strokes. Why? Why did he do this? Leonardo da Vinci was creating a masterpiece. My question to you, what are you creating? To what or whom are you paying close attention as you build your leadership team daily, puzzle piece by puzzle piece? Because however it turns out, you will have created that, you would have impacted that, you would have influenced that, one puzzle piece at a time. Let me give you an inspirational and a practical example of the butterfly effect within women and within education. Does anybody know who the person on the left is?
Nope.
In 1964, Helen Keller, ring a bell? Helen Keller was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Rewind 80 years earlier, Helen Keller was born in June 1880, and several days before her second birthday, she contracted an illness which rendered her both deaf and blind. No formal education between or before the age of 7, and being deaf and blind, she touched the faces of her family members, trying to communicate with them, trying to get a sense of their emotion. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Helen Keller, and she doesn't really need any introduction, but some of her accomplishments included writing 12 books, which were translated into 50 languages, being the first blind person to obtain a bachelor's degree, being the co-founder of the Helen Keller International, and in that they actually fight and combat the consequences of malnutrition and being blind. She was an avid speaker for women's rights in terms of birth control and voting rights. She traveled the world, visited 35 countries, and the biggest audience that she get to speak to or get to speak to, 2 million people in Japan. So there's no doubt that Helen Keller touched the lives of millions of people, thus earning herself this award of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But perhaps this Medal of Presidential Freedom should have gone to Anne Sullivan, who you might say. You see, it was Anne Sullivan who became Helen Keller's lifelong mentor and teacher. She actually used water and then drew numbers and letters inside Helen's palm for her to get to learn the alphabet. So if it wasn't for Anne Sullivan, who knows what would have become of Helen Keller? Unless the Medal of Presidential Freedom should have been given to Catherine Keller, an educated woman from Memphis, and also Helen Keller's mother. Recognizing the intelligence within her daughter, she refused to give up, and she sought help from people of the likes of Alexander Graham Bell, and eventually she was referred to Anne Sullivan. So is there an end to the story, tracing it back? Not really, because if we had to go into the life of Anne Sullivan, how far would we have to go back to see as to who raised her, who instilled in her such a love and patience for teaching that even a deaf and blind child could conquer the world? How far would we have to go back into the life of Catherine Keller to determine as to what made her such a devoted mother who refused to give up on her child? How far forward would we have to go into our lives to see what the impact is that we are making on leadership development? It's impossible to tell, because we cannot see into the future. But you see, this story of Helen Keller was told backwards, because the butterfly effect can only be seen and appreciated backwards. So when it comes to leadership development, sweat the small stuff. Because through the butterfly effect, Mother Nature teaches us that the time and effort that you spend with your leadership team matters. Whether they will continue to pursue leadership positions, whether they will think of themselves as worthy and valuable leadership teams, it depends on us. Just making sure that I'm not skipping anything here. I get so passionate that I get lost. That then for the butterfly effect, we find a very similar lesson in trees. So we'll be moving on to trees and see as to what Mother Nature is trying to teach us through trees. Most of the forest lives in the shadow of the giants that make up the highest canopy. These are the oldest trees with hundreds of children and thousands of grandchildren. They check in with their neighbors, sharing food, supplies and wisdom gathered over their long lives. And they do all this rooted in place, unable to speak or reach out or move. The secret of their success lies under the forest floor, where the vast root system supports the towering trunks above. Partnering with these roots are the symbiotic fungi called mycorrhizae. These fungi have countless branching thread-like hyphae that together make up the mycelium. The mycelium spreads across a much larger area than the tree root system and connects the roots of different trees together. These connections form mycorrhizal networks. Through mycorrhizal networks, fungi can pass resources and signaling molecules between trees. We know the oldest trees have the largest mycorrhizal networks, but the most connections to other trees. absorb some of the sugars produced during photosynthesis, but some travel on and enters the roots of neighbouring trees, a seedling that grows in the shade and has less opportunity to photosynthesize sugars. It makes sense for fungus to exchange soil nutrients and sugar with a tree. Both parties benefit. The fungus benefits from having connections with as many different trees as possible and maximizes its connections by shuttling molecules between trees. Plants actually reduce their contributions to fungi if the fungi don't facilitate exchanges between trees. These fungi pass an incredible amount of information between trees, and through the mycorrhizae, trees can tell when nutrients or signaling molecules are coming from a member of their own species or not. They can even tell when information is coming from a close relative like a sibling or a parent. Trees can also share information about events like drought or insect attacks through their fungal networks, causing their neighbours to increase production of protective enzymes in anticipation of trees. The forest's health relies on these intricate communication exchanges. With everything so deeply interconnected, what impacts one species is bound to impact others. So we can learn actually quite a bit about ourselves in this short story. And there's two ways in which this possible analogy can be viewed. You can either see education as a forest and each stakeholder or role player like ourselves being an individual tree. Or you can see your school as a forest with each individual staff member being an individual tree. But I want to skip to the end of the analogy and I want us to look at what does our forest look like at the moment. This is the reality. 24.9% of 25 to 34-year-olds with tertiary education do not have a job. 50% of 25 to 34-year-olds have not obtained a matric certificate. That means 50% of adults within our country do not have a matric certificate. 13.9% of 25 to 64-year-olds have a tertiary degree. The CEO World Magazine, in an article on 2nd of April 2024, placed South Africa 71st in terms of curriculum. And then a staggering 32.9% of unemployed citizens within South Africa. I know it was updated last week to 33%. This is what our forest looks like. And another question to you is, what change can we bring about to this? What does this mean for South Africa's economy? And what can we do in education to change what this forest looks like at the moment? I'm sure most of you are familiar with this quote by Nelson Mandela: education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And he uses a war metaphor here. I'd like to stick to trees, and I want us to become women who have planted trees to bring that change about. It's not about our students being part of the 75% of people who have matriculated or the 13% who have actually obtained a tertiary degree. It's about producing students who can contribute to the world and can actually create solutions to the problems that we're seeing in our forest. That is what our leadership is all about.